Hi, everybody. Today's Thursday, October 9th, 2025, and our dear friend Alex Krainer joins us. Welcome back, Alex.
Thank you for the invite, Nima. Always good to join you again.
Please subscribe and hit like button and follow what Alex is writing on his Substack. Right below his name, you can find his Substack and trendcompass.substack.com. And after Alex, I'm gonna have Pepe Escobar joining us as well. Alex, let's start with the peace plan of Donald Trump. And we know that after, hours after signing the peace plan, Israelis, they attacked and they're bombing, the Gaza and killing more people. But when it comes to the peace plan, and Netanyahu is trying to say that we are the winner of what has happened so far. And he tries to put himself and his administration as the winner of what has happened and what is going on right now. Looking at Israel today, because 2 days ago we had the anniversary of October the 7th. What is the position of Israel? Do you think that Donald Trump has had any other option than making a peace plan? Because after all, how long, what would be the extent of your, effort for Israel, your support for Israel? You have to decide about it. You are gonna go to war with Iran, with the whole Middle East. I would say somehow with the public opinion in the United States and in Europe and all around the world. This is what Donald Trump has been dealing with before coming to this decision. What has happened to Israel when you see Israel today compared to what it was before October the 7th?
Well, Israel has been dramatically weakened. Uh, that's that's very obvious. They have a hard time uh, bringing troops to battle. All they have really is dropping bombs everywhere. All they have is violence, nothing else. Their society is imploding. It's falling apart. Netanyahu himself is standing on very thin ice politically. Nobody knows what might happen if he's taken down and some new government has to take charge. The fanatical genocidal assault on Gaza is not going to stop, because it's almost like a consensus view of the Israeli society that they want to wipe the Palestinians off the map. I think that a large majority in polls is responding that they want the genocide to continue, and that if Israel takes a town or a village, that they should simply kill all the Palestinians there or expel them. So it doesn't seem likely that anything will change much. My impression is that Trump is attempting to buy time with this peace plan, which is incoherent. It's unworkable. The Israelis are obviously not going to accept it. Hamas is never going to accept to disarm, because they would have to put themselves at the mercy of the Israelis and maybe their Arab neighbors who have betrayed them time and again. So they can only rely on themselves, and therefore they will never disarm. So the whole thing is completely unworkable, to the point that you have to ask yourself, what is the point? Why are you even doing any of this? And I think that the only coherent reason that I can think of why Trump would be engaging in this peace process is to gain time, because sooner or later he's going to be pushed into a war against Iran. That is, it seems to me that, I'm pretty convinced that Trump is trying everything possible to avoid going to war against Iran. But Israel is desperate for renewing this war. It's madness, but that's what they're hell bent on doing. And I think that due to political pressures at home, and we've, since Charlie Kirk assassination, we have a much better appreciation of these political pressure, because it's not just, I always used to thought it's the US Congress, which is, between 70 and 80% loyal to Benjamin Netanyahu. It's the Zionist Jews and Christian evangelicals that are fanatically devoted to the state of Israel. But now we see also that there's a very powerful network woven into the structures of power in the United States, consisting of these Zionist billionaires like Bill Ackman and Larry Ellison and others, who have infiltrated the Trump administration, who have a very, very strong stranglehold on the media in the United States. And the effect of that is that the day that Israel decides to renew their attack on Iran, the political pressure building up on Trump to rescue Israel and to join the war against Iran is probably going to be unbearable. And we know that neither Israel nor the United States can defeat Iran, because Iranians now have extraordinarily powerful weapons with which they can basically turn all of Israel into rubble. They can also target all 60 of the US and other Western military bases in the region. And they can probably sink many of the Western naval assets in the region. So the only thing that Trump can get out of that war is a devastating, humiliating defeat, which is why he wants to avoid it, obviously. We have to keep in mind that the United States is now opening a front against Venezuela, which is also completely insane, but it looks like they're doing it. And they're also still involved in Europe with Project Ukraine, much less than before, but it's still draining the United States military and financial assets. They're still kind of committed to containing China, and so this is a lot of potential war fronts for an exhausted and depleted military that failed to subdue the Taliban in Afghanistan after 20 years of trying. And they failed to subdue Ansar Allah in Yemen after more than 10 years of trying. We have to remember that it's not just Operation Rough Rider that Trump launched in March of this year. It's also the Operation Prosperity Guardian that was launched in December of 2023, and then the proxy war that was waged against Yemen since 2015. So that's been 10 years of relentless attacks and bombings and all kinds of everything that they tried with all their military assets and their proxy forces, and they failed. And now they're going to fight Venezuela and they're going to fight Iran. I don't see any sense of it, and it's so obvious that I'm pretty sure that people in Trump administration see the same. So then, you have some kind of a cobbled up together Frankenstein peace proposal that nobody can earnestly implement and live with. And so I can't see any other reason for it other than gaining time.
Alex, when you look at the situation in the Middle East, morally, militarily, geopolitically, it seems that since October the 7th, Israel not only has been defeated in all these areas, but forced the United States to also be defeated in those areas. Look at what has happened between the United States and Yemen. Donald Trump came to power, was elected. He said that this time around going to be different. We're going to smash them. We're going to. Pete Hegseth was just bragging about it. They went to the Red Sea, then they declared that Houthis capitulated and all. So I think Donald Trump, after all, if we say that Donald Trump is, he doesn't know what he's doing. He's so many things that these sort of rhetorics, in my opinion. But after he understands, if you cannot defeat Yemen, how can you go against Iran? And it's not just about Iran, Alex. I think Russia and China, with the weapons that they're providing, to Iran, somehow change the game because they're sending some sort of sign to the United States. Iran is not going to be alone, as Russia wasn't alone during the conflict in Ukraine. What is that? Do you think that there any sort of understanding between the Trump administration and Netanyahu? Do they understand what's going on, the dynamic of the reality of the Middle East?
Well, I think there must be, Nima, because what you say is absolutely true, and it's very obvious. And even before, I know that since the 12-Way War last summer, we had China providing additional weapon systems to Iran. Russia has provided additional weapon systems to Iran. Iranians themselves have learned some very valuable lessons from that war, and they will, without a doubt, they will be applying them in any future conflict. We have seen that Iranians have extremely powerful precision weapons against which neither Israel nor the United States have any effective defenses. And I remember one article in the Haaretz admitting that one Iranian missile has destroyed 28 buildings in Tel Aviv. And I don't think that the Iranians even used their most powerful missiles. And then we've seen that the Chinese have also provided new weapon systems to Egypt. And we've seen that the Pakistanis have said that they will come to Israel's defense. And I think that
Iran's defense, you mean?
Oh, yeah, sorry, Iran's defense. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think that, if a wider war erupts, I think that you will see different forces begin to emerge, which are now in hiding. They're in, let's call it maybe hibernation, forces like Hezbollah. I know that large segments of the Syrian Arab army have been preserved and went into hiding into Iran and into Iraq, and apparently some of them are still present in Syria. And then, we must not forget, or not to mention Egypt, which is not going to be able to resist getting involved. And then, we have to remember that the majority population of Jordan are Palestinians. And so who knows what might happen. For sure, the Israelis or the British or the Americans, if they have any illusions that they would be able to control the war and that they could just surgically remove Iranian regime, that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen like that. Iran is preparing for that. Iranian leaders believe that an attack by Israel on Iran is inevitable. So they're preparing for it. And we know also, Iran has caused massive havoc in Israel in 12 days of attacks. And we know that Iran has enough ammunition and missiles and drones to create a practically uninterrupted conveyor belt of drones and missiles going from Iran into Israel that could continuously go on for 2 years. So it's complete madness. But for some reason, Israel is completely obsessed with going to war against everybody. It's as though they don't know how to conduct foreign policy at all, other than by killing people and blowing up their nations. And by now, even I think another very important aspect of Iranian defense is that they have, I believe, complete redundancy in their leadership. So if anybody gets taken out, there's continuity of government and there's replacements that are going to be affected immediately. And Israel has been killing the leadership of various of their neighboring countries for many years now, and it never amounts to anything much. It just seems to me that they don't know any other way of conducting policy other than by killing people. But this time I think they will fail, and I think that Trump just wants to avoid being part of that failure.
Israel, do you think that what has happened in Syria would be a win for Israel?
In the short term, it looks like, but it could be a Pyrrhic victory. I think they've only spread themselves thinner. They've opened a new front. They've actually removed the buffer between Israel and Turkey. Because Israel has now made Turkey into their number one enemy. It's no longer even Iran. Turkey is their number one enemy, and the HTS that's in charge of Damascus now is pretty much a Turkish proxy force. So now Israel and Turkish proxy forces are up against one another, whereas before Israel and Lebanon were at least buffers between Israel and Turkey. That situation seems to be an irreversible collision course that they're controlling for the moment, but I think it's only a matter of time. And now another gray zone is being created on the island of Cyprus, which itself could blow up at some point in the near future. So no, I think that everything Israel has done since October 7, and the foundations for that have been set up a lot longer than that. Everything they have done, they have weakened themselves. At the very beginning of their campaign against Gaza in 2003, Israeli generals was saying, "Look, we are an army that's geared up for very quick campaigns. This has to be over in a few weeks." Well, it's been going on for over 3 years now, and I think that Israel is being gutted economically, socially, morally, militarily, in every possible way. But it's understandable that in this situation, the government is not going to say, "Oh, we're actually being defeated. We're actually finished." Of course, they have to climb up on the soapbox, thump their chest, and say, "We're winning. We're the best. Nobody can." It's like these MMA fights and World Wrestling Federations. They always have to come up and do the trash talk. "I'm the best. I'm going to win. I'm going to humiliate the other guy. We're invincible." It's all just for show. The country is being destroyed.
Alex, here is what the peace plan is look like. It seems that in the first round, the blue line, their current line is the blue line, and they're gonna the first step of agreement would be the yellow line, then to the red line. But after all, they eventually want to get to the dashed line, and Israel just they want some sort of buffer zone around Gaza, as you see in that dash line. I don't see, Alex, what's going on with Israel. we can say that the peace plan would work or would not work, but after all, Israel, Netanyahu cannot afford not having war. This is the problem. This is
Yeah.
the problem. Donald Trump should deal with this, not anything else. The understanding between the United States and Israel should be, I think, the language should change somehow. I don't know if behind the scene they're changing the language between the Trump administration and Netanyahu. I believe that they're gonna attack Iran as soon as they get out of Gaza or the situation comes down a little bit. They're gonna attack Iran to start again. And let's put it this way: I feel that as soon as they get the hostages, they're gonna start attacking Iran, and then during the war with Iran, which the United States would join, they're gonna attack again Gaza. You know, this is, you can call it conspiracy theory, but when you look at the behavior of Israel, you cannot expect nothing better than that. They're gonna worsen the situation. I don't see Netanyahu being capable of any agreement. They're bombing Lebanon as there is a ceasefire between the two countries. How what's your take on that? What, because Donald Trump is so much insisting on, you know, on the hostages, but you have to go beyond the hostages. It's something bigger than that, something more, substantial.
Yeah. I think that Donald Trump, with focusing on the hostages, is trying to claim any moral high ground that's available to him. And in the United States, if he said like, well, you have to stop killing the Palestinians, well, that already makes you an anti-Semite. You can't even say that. So this whole talk about hostages, it's another one of those disingenuous, insincere, virtue signaling things that doesn't mean anything, because, well, you mentioned that Israel might attack Iran as soon as they have hostages. I think they might. I think they might attack even sooner, because I'm not sure that. I actually think that if Hamas released all the hostages and turned them over to Israeli authorities, that would only complicate things for Benjamin Netanyahu. So I wouldn't be surprised if the government in Tel Aviv doesn't actually want the return of hostages. And then, those maps of them like squeezing the Palestinians until they can just push them over into the sea. That's a military plan, and military plans never work out according to what the planners intended. So that's their Christmas list. That's what they want to achieve. But they forgot to ask Hamas about it, and Hamas is still there. They never defeated Hamas. They still have who knows how many miles of underground tunnels through which they're still attacking and ambushing the IDF forces and inflicting very heavy casualties on them. IDF soldiers don't want to go to war anymore. They don't want to fight anymore, because they're just being there sitting ducks. Something can strike them at any moment from anywhere. They're scared. They're exhausted. They're depleted. The economy of the country is disintegrating. The whole thing is just an agony, and to a large extent, the whole agony is being perpetuated because without it, Benjamin Netanyahu no longer has any future. So he's keeping it up. And so I suspect that the attack on Iran will happen before the hostages are returned, and it's just perpetuation and escalation of complete suicidal madness.
is the United States, if they decide to attack Iran, is the United States gonna be with them since the beginning of the war, or they're gonna join in the aftermath of the first attacks?
I would expect that they will join afterwards. It'll take some time for the for the propaganda and the psychosis to build up enough pressure for some kind of a war. I wouldn't be surprised even if Trump administration, and I have no evidence for this whatsoever. I'm just coming from the point of view, what would I do if I were in their shoes? That I would be already in talks with the Iranians to say, this is coming, we're not going to be able to avoid it. Let's come to some kind of an agreement where we can bomb you and pretend that we're part of this war, so that we can make a big show for our media, for domestic consumption, but without actually trying to destroy you, defeat you, regime change you. Let's just have a fake war between ourselves. That's what I would be doing right now, because otherwise the whole situation is completely not only suicidal for Israel, it's also extremely destructive for the United States. Again, because they cannot defeat Iran, and Iran can inflict extremely heavy damage on the United States and whoever comes to join Israel. In the United States, the public support for Israel has pretty much cratered. 2 years of genocide have shown Israel in a very, very ugly light, and more people are seeing it. So the United States joining the war on Israel is not going to be automatic, and it's not going to be immediate. Like in the case of World War I and World War II, it took a while, with a lot of propaganda, with a lot of psychosis, with a lot of jingoism and drum beating, to finally bring the American people over the line, to build up a critical mass of people saying, okay, let's go to war, let's destroy Iran. I think this time around is going to be a lot more difficult, because we've just spent 2 years watching them kill children in Palestine and starve the people there. So the sympathy that existed for Israel is gone. And then, with World War I, it took Lusitania, false flag attack, to galvanize people and get their consent for war. In World War II, it took Pearl Harbor to galvanize the people, to build up, the emotional charge. But back then, there was no internet, there was no social media, there was no dialogue works, Today, all of these things exist, and a lot of people are, particularly people who are interested in this, that they're paying attention. And so it's much more difficult to control the narrative. And I'll throw the last bit in here, which I think shouldn't be neglected either. In 2020, we had this absolute event in which Western governments and different authorities pretty much shredded their credibility. It was the public health crisis, right? And I think that they have caused a very large segment of Western populations to no longer trust the governments. So even if you follow the same playbook, you get the war going, you start using propaganda to build up, mass formation psychosis, to say, oh, poor Israel, they're being destroyed, and look at what the evil Iranians are doing to them. I don't know that it's going to have the same effect as it might have had when we all depended on radio and television and newspapers. So I think Israel has reached the end of the road. Even if the United States joins, I think it's going to be fake. And I think that in not too distant future, Israel will no longer exist.
two outcome if Israel attacks. One of them would be Iran attacking Israel, and you know we know that how capable they are in destroying the facilities and attacking. And as you mentioned, the they have a lot of information. By the way, recently they have information of Demona, nuclear power plant, and they know where to hit. But do you see the possibility of using nuclear bombs in the Middle East if things go in that direction? How is that going to to change the whole situation? I Every time I think about the Middle East, actually I'm mostly fearful of the use of nuclear weapons, not anything else, because with conventional weapons there is no way that Israel can defeat Iran if they go in the direction of the use of nuclear weapons. And we know that the United States would totally support them if they use that just to calm down the international backlash from that sort of attack. How do you see the things going to that direction?
I think this is one of those things that I have to say it's a 50-50 for me. Either it will happen or it won't happen. And I don't know on what basis I could decide whether it is more or less likely to happen. If that you're very right. This is the wild card which could change everything. I don't actually think that the Israelis could defeat Iran with the nukes. They could cause tremendous destruction and huge casualties in Iran. But it wouldn't be the end of the road for Iran. It wouldn't be, we have a precedent. Japan has been nuked twice. Life went on. Japan still exists, and Japanese society is still, well, I shouldn't say alive and well, but it's let's say is still there. But the problems in Japan are not due to the nuclear bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's the financial bombs that are being dropped nonstop. This is the bigger problem. But it would be a horrific event, because then very likely the Pakistanis would launch a nuclear attack on Israel. So it would be the end of Israel. Absolutely. I'm not 100% sure that the United States would support Israel in this. For sure, you would have people like Mike Huckabee and Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz, people of this cut, who would be supportive. But I think that the larger part of the American public would be absolutely revolted. And so it's, like every country, United States is not a monolith. And so it's hard to say how things would unfold longer term, where the dust would settle exactly. But I suspect that it wouldn't be favorable to Israel. And that as a result, a lot of people in the American administration, and especially among its military forces, would actually not be supportive of Israel. That they would be that there would be a revolt. And then we have to also keep in mind that experience of USS Liberty from 1967 or 60, yeah, I think it was 67, right? That is still present in the minds of many US servicemen. And it's increasingly, a lot of American people are learning about this now through social media, because they didn't know before, because this story was scrubbed from the records. And so now they're beginning to understand. So I think that, since the pandemic, since 2020, the whole way of how narratives evolve in Western societies has changed, and it has changed very radically. And in all wars, the ruling establishments, one of the most important things that they have to do is control the narrative. They need to win and maintain public consent for war. I think this is no longer a given. I think they no longer have control. Well, look at Larry Ellison panic buying TikTok in the United States, because it's that important to them to be able to control the narrative. And I don't know if buying TikTok is going to do it. They would have to also buy X, and they would have to maybe buy
CBS News, the head of CBS News.
Yeah, exactly. But like the truth will always seep through. You cannot make the information space hermetically shut off anymore. I mean, even the Soviet Union wasn't able to do that back in the day, even without the internet and the social media. So that's impossible. I think it's going to fail, and I think that it's a 50-50 thing that they might try to use nukes. I'm sure that the Iranians are prepared for that, so they're going to be able to maybe destroy the launch facilities in Israel. But the problem is that Israel also has submarines, courtesy of Germany, which I think do have nuclear capable missiles on them. So, they could be in the Persian Gulf as we speak. So who knows?
Yeah. After all, I believe that the main battlefield for Israel, as you've mentioned, is in the United States, not in the Middle East.
Yes.
And they're trying to do everything. TikTok, CBS News, you see the people like Van Jones coming out, and I'm sure that you watched his video on Bill Maher's show, and he was just mocking the people, dead babies.
I haven't actually seen that. No.
Yeah, he was just. It's unbelievable. He said that when you open the application TikTok, you see all about the dead babies in Gaza. So what's going on? The audience were laughing. This is the disinformation of Iran, and together with other countries, it's basically about the providing us with false information. But how you can deny the reality of what is happening in Gaza? You hear it from some an African American guy, Van Jones. He was he's always on CNN, advocating for it's all ridiculous. Liberalism has ended. I think the new liberals they have destroyed. I remember once I was hearing Noam Chomsky said that the new liberalism is literally destroying the classic liberalism. That he was mentioning that he was part of the classic one.
Yeah, I think you're right, Nima, and I think that's also part of the problem. I think that they are, they're panicked, I believe, and they're responding by doubling down on schemes and strategies that are already failing. Their propaganda is getting increasingly more crude, unsophisticated, unnuanced. It's becoming very, very obvious, and they're trying to overcome the loss of quality with quantity. So they're pushing it everywhere, and it's becoming so convincing. I'll give you an example. The Ukrainians were complaining that Putin kidnapped 19,000 or 20,000 children from Ukraine. And this has been pumped into the media space for practically 3 years now. and always demonizing the Russians more and more and more. But nothing much happened, right? And then came the peace negotiations last, when was it, in February or so, March? And the Russians were saying, well, okay, you want these children back, can you provide us a list of the children that we kidnapped? And they got a list of 339 children, right? Well, did the propagandists adjust their numbers? Actually, they did. So now they invented a new and improved narrative where the Russians didn't kidnap 339 children or even 19,000 children. Now it's 1.6 million children. Because the smaller number doesn't trigger enough outrage, the bigger number doesn't trigger enough outrage. So let's add 2 zeros to it, And how do they justify this? Obviously, Putin didn't put them all on buses and trains. They kidnapped these children by conquering the territory where the children live. And, the danger in this is because they're already sending these children to military camps where they're training them how to fight and kill Ukrainians, Europeans, whoever. So this represents a security threat to us. I mean, you have to really be a complete moron to buy any of this. And then I see the same happening on the climate change front, on the LGBT front, on all of these fronts. It's just getting dumber and dumber and dumber. So I expect that the percentage of the populations in the West that are actually moved by these pandemics is shrinking continuously. I think the only real danger is if there is a really convincing false flag attack, like something that would really trigger a very strong emotional response by the people, and then they assault us with heavy-handed propaganda, and then they create another mass formation psychosis wave, and then people get disorientated, and then they believe the narrative, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's the Russians or it's the Iranians, we have to all go to war now. I don't know what this false flag attack could be, but I think it could be a nuclear device exploding something, either a nuclear bomb or a dirty bomb. But
in London?
Well, that's my fear, that's my fear. I think the easier target would be Ukraine, but I'm not sure if that would do the trick. London might do the trick, and I'm pretty certain that they're planning this. Whether they will do it, whether they will actually go with it or not, we don't know. But it's been more than a year that all the webcams in London have gone dark, and there's no explanation. We're talking more than 200 webcams around the city. Why would this be done? Why is this not explained? I think that, we had 9/11, and, people, there's a lot of footage that doesn't gel with the official narrative. And so maybe, the people who are planning this event are thinking, yeah, let's not have the webcams on, because it's better that people don't see the actual thing happening. We'll tell them the story afterwards. And they probably already have the newspaper stories and the TV reports already prepared to launch this if this happens. And I think that it's been planned already. We'll see if it's actually done or not.
Yeah. Here is what Van Jones said on Bill Maher's show, Alex.
isn't part of that because we had to fold everything into critical race theory, and somehow the Middle East became part of, you know.
I see it differently. And I love this conversation because I think people, those of us who went to college, give a lot more credit to college courses for how the world works than I do. This is not about critical race theory on college campuses. This is about Iran. Iran and Qatar have come up with a disinformation campaign that they are running through TikTok and Instagram that is massive. If you are a young person, you open up your phone and all you see is dead Gaza baby, dead Gaza baby, dead Gaza baby,
right.
Diddy, dead Gaza baby, dead Gaza baby. Like, that's basically your whole feed. So that's not DEI. That is a geopolitical adversary that is deliberately trying to divide the West against itself.
That view is not.
So I cannot believe that this guy would go that deep in support of Israel. And it's not just this, Alex. We know the new head of CBS News, Barry Weiss. She, when she was, after becoming the head of CBS News, Barry Weiss launched campaign to defend Van Jones. They're trying to do everything. I would say Israel is trying to do everything. Yesterday, here is what Laura Loomer said on X. They're connecting the assassination of Charlie Kirk to China. These people are so desperate. You have to be so desperate to connect Charlie Kirk's case to China.
Yes. Yes, I think that this is where they fail because, well, the United States has 330 million people or however many, even more now. You're always going to find some Van Jones who will say anything for money. And if you spread enough money around, you're going to get these people to talk your corner. But I think it's too late. They're slamming the barn doors shut after the horses have already bolted. Barry Weiss doesn't exactly have high degree of credibility. Van Jones, I don't think anybody knew that he existed until a few weeks ago. Who is he? And now he's being promoted everywhere. And they're so desperate that they're inventing these completely implausible stories about the Chinese being behind the Charlie Kirk murder. I'm surprised that they didn't come up with Iranians. That would have been more clever. But it's so dumb. It's so dumb, Nima. I think it can't but fail. And they, their whole shtick depends on us being stupid. And so I think the best thing to do is to get back at them, to push back, to fight for, the right stuff, is for us all to get as smart as we possibly can, to question everything they say, to research, to begin to connect the dots more and more competently, because then we're very, very hard to lie to. And we already are, which is why they're reaching for these preposterous stories and nonsense. And I doubt that very many people are buying this.
I think the dominant voice within the MAGA movement is right now closer to Tucker Carlson, to Steve Bannon. These people are not part of the administration, but they have a lot of support. Their sort of mindset, their sort of strategy for the United States, for the future United States, is much more popular than the official one represented by the Trump administration and the people who are working with Donald Trump. And here is what Steve Bannon said. I think it's important. It raises a lot of concern for Israel.
What did Netanyahu have to do? He totally trumped up, bald-faced lie about the Persians. They had greater strategic ambitions and they didn't care if they sucked the United States into a 20 or 30-year war. Those days are over. President Trump has asserted himself that, hey, you are a protector. What did Ignatius say? He's given orders, right? He's given orders the way it should be. If they want to go do it on their own, hey, God bless you. Go for it. But do not suck us in. We're not in for this. It's outrageous what has happened over the last couple of years, and we still don't have an investigation on October 7th. And believe me, if the hands were clean of Netanyahu, you would have had an investigation and been out in 30 days. Write that down with your number 2 pencil, because that's going to come and you're going to be shocked by it. There's no way that just kind of happened.
Alex, we're not talking about young people on the college campuses. We're talking about, the base of the movement, the Republican Party, the MAGA movement. These people have changed. This is problematic for Israel.
Yes, exactly. I think that this is one of those things that's unstoppable. Because, and they have to push their propaganda. It's almost like it's uphill. They have to put a lot of effort to contrive these false stories so that they're credible and to promote them, even though they're unconvincing. Whereas on the other side, truth can just catch fire like that and spread very quickly. Like when it can be just some guy or a girl with a guitar make a song, and if it hits the right nerve, it goes like wildfire. We've seen that happen more than once, and it's a song. It's hard to censor that, and so they're vulnerable to all these things. To me, it seems like this is a tsunami that's turned against them, and they can flog the waves all they like, but they can't turn the tide. And so, like with the young people, they lost it. Now, increasingly, they're losing the older people as well. I think at this point they can spend any amount of money and it's still going to fail. Back to the same conclusion. I think that Israel has reached the end of the road.
Alex, before wrapping up, we know that during the Valda conference, Putin has talked about Tomahawk missiles. That raised a lot of question in the mind of people who want to put an end to the conflict in Ukraine, who are interested in peace between Russia and the West. And those people, they're people who are somehow criticizing Putin for his manner. He's so soft. His language is not that strong to make the United States understand the gravity of the escalations that are going on with the Tomahawk missiles, with other things like false flag operations, but basically with the Tomahawk missiles. And if Tomahawk missiles go in Ukraine, then Taurus missiles, then the new escalation, the new cycle of escalations between Russia and the West. And I'm going to have a debate between Scott Ritter and John Helmer on Friday tomorrow about these issues. But what is your take? To my understanding, if I want to describe the behavior of Vladimir Putin and his sort of actions since the war started, he is, in my opinion, he is one of the best leaders of the world today. And do you think, because he did everything, considering he reduced the number of casualties on the part of Russians, Russia is winning the war. Russia, somehow help those people, Europeans to understand what's at stake for Europe. in my opinion, with this sort of behavior coming from Vladimir Putin, instead of being more aggressive, he tried to make the case for Europeans that you would not benefit from this sort of attitude. But when it comes to the criticism toward Vladimir Putin, do you see any sort of legitimacy in those sort of ideas?
No, it's largely propaganda. We've had 24/7 demonization of Vladimir Putin pretty much since 2003. So not immediately after he came into power, because during the first 2 or 3 years, the Western leaders believed that Putin was going to be their own.
Rio, you're going to join us in the aftermath. Alex is leaving us.
Yeah. So I pretty much since 2003, they realized that he's charting a new course for Russia, and all we get is propaganda. Vladimir Putin is I think today by far the most competent leader, and maybe the only grown-up in addition to Xi Jinping. And I think that we largely have him to thank that we haven't already fallen into a nuclear war.
Yeah. Alex, great pleasure as always.
Thank you, Nima.
Thank you so
always
much.
good to join you, and I look forward to the next time.
See you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. How's it going, Pepe?
I have no clue.
Você desapareceu. You disappeared.
Nima, you obviously have no fucking clue what I have been doing. Né? I crossed China for 5,000 kilometers in 1 month. I did a report that nobody does on Xinjiang. Come on, give me a break.
Yeah, I saw the videos on your Telegram channel. And,
yeah, but that's nothing. You have no idea what it's. We shot a documentary, 2 terabytes of images. So now we have to go through it, edit it, and hopefully we'll be ready in December. But it's a lot of work. And what we did, nobody does. We traveled with Uyghurs back to back from Urumqi and the eastern part of Xinjiang to Kashgar, all the way very close to the China-Pakistan border. Nobody does that kind of shit. Nobody, especially in the West, So I would take 1 day to explain this trip to you and our audience. So, but we have to.
What was? Let me ask this question. What was the importance of this trip, and strategically and geopolitically?
Wait. Is the show already on?
Yeah, we are on. We are on.
Fuck. Okay, sorry, everybody. My brain now is a vortex. So I apologize to everyone. Yeah. Okay, Nima, please. Question. Sorry.
And yeah, when you look at, because this trip, you mentioned that you for such a long time you wanted to do this.
Yes.
To visit those places that you've been visiting so far. What is the importance of this? What was the importance of this trip? And geopolitically and economically, how can you explain that to us?
That's a very good question, Nima. And that's why I would need 1 day talking to you and to our audience to give a proper response. So I'm going to try the Hollywood pitch where you do this in 25 words. This is how you sell a film in Hollywood. Okay. A little bit more. I have been tracking the ancient Silk Roads since 1997. My first trip to the ancient Silk Road, starting in Xi'an, crossing China all the way to Xinjiang, and then linking with the Karakoram Highway, and then crossing to China-Pakistan border, was after the Hong Kong handover in 1997. And for me, for my professional history, this is it's one of the landmarks, because I was in Hong Kong for 1 month covering the handover. The night of the handover, we went to celebrate in a nightclub called 1997. Everybody was there, expats, Hong Kongers, Singaporeans, etc. But the problem is at 8 in the morning, I had to take a plane to Xi'an and start a Silk Road trip, which I did without sleeping. And history intervened. This was the day of the start of the Asian financial crisis. The fall of the baht was on July 1st, 1997, the day after the Hong Kong handover. Well, I had been living in Asia for over 3 years by that time, so I was already deep into Asia. And of course, getting deeper and deeper into China. What I didn't know is that the Asian financial crisis would change the whole of Asia. And then it took us a long time to see what really happened, the machinations. It was a financial coup by certain Western financial elites. There's no question about that. But in the first few days, the whole thing disappeared because I went deep into China. So that was when, for the first time, I crossed the ancient Silk Road. I came back the next year in 1998. Then I came back again in the early 2000s. And then I came back again in the late 2000s. And of course, starting in the 2010s, it became very difficult for foreigners to travel in Xinjiang because the campaign by the usual suspects in the West, denigrating, smearing, and trying to destroy Xinjiang was like that. And of course, financing by MI6 and CIA of Uyghur separatist Salafi jihadi tinged people. One of their headquarters, by the way, Nima, is in Istanbul. If you cross Istanbul from the European side to the Asian side, and you walk in some of the squares in the Asian side, they are all there. These Uyghurs are all there, financed and weaponized by MIT, Turkish military intel. And it's their base in still Asia, but very close to Europe. Then in 2019, I did the other side of this trip. I went to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan to see the Belt and Road in action on the Central Asian stands. So I went to these three borders of these three stands with Xinjiang. I got as close, in some of the cases, I was like 5 kilometers away. When I was in the Pamir Highway, I was in a no man's land. And people, local people, Pamiris were saying, look, if you keep walking over that fence over there, you get to Xinjiang. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, no man's land, you know. So these are their borders. And of course, the Belt and Road borders, which are very important. In Kazakhstan, there are 3 superimposed borders, one for passengers, one for trucks, and another one for cars in a mega highway. This is the key border crossing for all trains coming from China, everywhere. They stop in Alashankou in northern Xinjiang, which is the last Chinese city. And the first dry border that they find is Korgos in Kazakhstan. And from there, they go all over the place, right? So I couldn't do it. I couldn't do the Chinese side of the trip because COVID intervened. I wanted to do this trip 5 years ago, Nima, in 2020. So I waited after COVID. I waited for the right conditions to travel in China. In fact, the modernization, especially of central part of China, the Gansu corridor, all the way to Xinjiang, post-COVID, this past 2.5 years was breakneck speed. So this was the right moment to do the trip for several reasons. And on top of it, the timing was impeccable. It was right after the SCO summit in Tianjin, where Xi Jinping received the leaders of the SCO. The top of Eurasia announced the global governance concept. And the SCO summit in Tianjin was as important as the BRICS summit in Kazan last year. The SCO now is a major player in the international arena, and there's no turning back. And the Central Asians, which are 4 of them are represented. Turkmenistan is not, because Turkmenistan is an idiosyncratic, so-called non-aligned power in Central Asia. The other 4 are members of the SCO, and their interactions with Russia and China are closer and closer. By the way, Putin was in Tajikistan today, signing a strategic partnership agreement. And of course, the Victory Day parade in Beijing on October 3rd, commemorating, let's say, the renaissance of Rio, China. The 80th anniversary of the Chinese victory over the Japanese invasion that started in 1931, and it was the original start of the World War II. It was not in Europe, it was in Asia, and it was Japan invading China in 1931. Very few people in the West know that. Some are starting to pay attention to the historical record. And of course, the victory of China over Nazi fascism, the Asian version. So when you put this all together, the timing was perfect for this particular trip. Plus, of course, on a personal level, I wanted to finish some of the research that was left for my next book, which will be a comparison between the ancient Silk Roads and the new Silk Roads. So I needed to revisit some of the places, especially Xi'an, the former imperial capital, Shangan, which was during the Tang Dynasty. Many of you may know that it was the most sophisticated city on the planet in the 8th century. 1 million people lived in Xi'an, and it was multicultural because you had traders, merchants, religious preachers, everybody from different parts of Eurasia, from Bactria, from Sogdiana, Turkic peoples, Persian peoples. Fascinating. So Xi'an was the capital of the world at the time, was Xi'an. And of course, all the way through the Buddhist original Silk Road, all the way to Dunhuang, where you have the Buddhist Mogao Caves, which is the most important collection of painting and Buddhist statuary in China, and one of the most important in the world. And then I did all this solo. This was the first part of my trip. I did it by high-speed rail. I did it by, I even took a taxi to the desert, which was very, very funny. I wanted to visit the western limit of China during the Han Dynasty, and even centuries later, and even during parts of the Tang Dynasty. It's called the Jade Gate Pass. It was a gate. You needed a pass to go through, and after that was not China anymore. And the Chinese at the time used to call it unknown lands to the west, and in the official terminology, Western regions. Western regions, but not necessarily part of China, and most of it was not. So I visited the Yumengguan Pass as well. And then I took another high-speed rail to go to Xinjiang. I arrived in Murumqi. And the second part of the trip was quite something. We were a small group, mostly Chinese, with local Uyghur support, our support group all across the trip, all of them Uyghurs, except one of our drivers who was a Kazakh, who also spoke Uyghur because he is living in Urumqi. And our objective is extremely ambitious, to shoot a documentary on the road in Xinjiang, which is exactly what we did. We shot 2 terabytes of images. They're absolutely outstanding images. And the objective of this documentary is to show the real Xinjiang. I proposed it. It's going to be in a new platform. I proposed the original idea. I drew more or less a screenplay of where should we go. We follow it almost to the letter. It was crazy because it was. I think we went around 4,000 kilometers only inside Xinjiang. So we were traveling every day and everywhere that mattered. The oasis in the North and Silk Road, the oasis in the Southern Silk Road. We crossed the Taklamakan Desert from north to south. And then we recrossed a little bit more because we went to see a village in the middle of the Taklamakan, which it's called the Lost Tribe of the Taklamakan. It's people who have been living in the middle of the desert for centuries. And you know what they're doing now, Nima, which is extraordinary. They told us, look, we have a business enterprise now. And it's crazy because it's 2 streets, 1 flagpole with the Chinese flag, wobbly Wi-Fi, like 6 or 7 shops, and that's it. They're building a series of comfortable bed and breakfasts for the off-road crowd in China. Many people in the West don't know that a lot of young people in China, they're huge into off-road travel. And going to the middle of the Taklamakan for them is it's the Holy Grail. It's unpaved. You have to, navigate the dunes. You have to know how to drive in the dunes, which is a very, very tricky thing. So, and then we did our Xinjiang from deserts to oasis to the big city, Urumqi, which is a high-tech Mecca, to Kashgar, which is the #1 oasis of the ancient Silk Roads. And in the new Silk Roads, it's the start of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. Once again, the geopolitical importance of the trip, because you are at the hub of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which is the #1 project of Belt and Road. The most important one is the CPEC. Starts in Kashgar, follows the Karakoram Highway, crosses the China-Pakistan border, and goes to the Arabian Sea in southern Pakistan. So all that was very, very obviously, we didn't have enough time. And that means that I already proposed, and it was approved at a dinner 2 days ago here. We're going to do a second part next year. And the second part next year is going to be focused on Belt and Road. We're going to focus exclusively on the geoeconomic importance of Belt and Road for China, for Xinjiang, and the connection of Xinjiang with the Central Asian neighbors. And of course, the story that everybody around the world knows. All those trains full of everything that depart from China, they cross from Xinjiang to Central Asia, West Asia, and to Europe. So just to give an idea for you, Nima, and for our audience. One night I told the guys, look, we have to go to the train station to see the trains leaving to Central Asia. So we get there at 11, almost midnight. Everything is dark. There's one guard at the door. The station is closed. The trains depart during the day. There are no train departures at night. So obviously we were extremely frustrated, of course, because we couldn't shoot that. But as we are leaving, was very, very funny. We stop at the crossroads, and guess who goes by in front of us? A cargo train full of merchandise going west. So in the end, at least we got one train. So, so these are only a few of the details, but geoeconomically, geopolitically, sociologically, in terms of development, gastronomically, culturally, this is one of the trips of a lifetime, if not the trip of a lifetime, and one of the most important trips in the world. And doing it now and showing the scope and breadth of Chinese development, this is the #1 theme. How China set out in 1999 when they officially launched the Go West campaign. How in only 25 years, They turned Xinjiang into an economic powerhouse, Nima. And when you see that in front of you, it's absolutely mind-boggling. I can give you zillions of examples. Okay, just a few. You arrive in Urumqi. I remember Urumqi very well from even 10, 15 years ago. I arrived in Urumqi, I got lost because now they have two downtowns full of towers on both sides linked by a highway. So you don't even know where you are. First, you have to reorganize your geography. It grows so fast. But that's typical China, right? You're leaving Urumqi and you go to the oasis of Turfan, which is very important in the Northern Silk Road. What do you see from the impeccable 6-lane highway? A forest of solar panels, a forest of wind turbines. And when I mean forest, it's forest. It's one after another, miles and miles on end. You see those absolutely extraordinarily solar power stations where you see the light of the sun reflecting on top of the power station for tens and tens of miles around, And you see everything electrified. You see gigantic electric poles, one after another. Fiber optics, everything linked by fiber optics. Don't forget, this is in the middle of the desert. We have the Tian Shan Mountains in the north, we have deserts in the south, and this is a tiny corridor which comes from the Gansu province, gets into Xinjiang, and in Xinjiang, it's crazy because you have to negotiate mountains in the north, mountains in the south, and a desert in the middle, the Taklamakan, which in the folklore you can get in, but you never get out. But in fact, it means in Uyghur, a place to stay, something like that, a ground place to stay. So you get to a tier 4 or tier 5 city, an oasis in one of the branches of the Silk Road. You stay in hotels that people in Europe cannot even dream of, if they existed in Europe, in terms of comfort and modernity. And they pay what? $67 a night. You stay in an impeccable room where everything is electronic. Drop dead clean, drop dead modern. Forget about those idiots in the West. They don't know that this exists, in fact. You go to visit their small industries, for instance. We did I would say, the quartet of the fame of the Silk Road over the centuries: jade, carpets, silk, and knives. We visited the 4 major producing oases of jade, silk carpets, very high quality, knives, Yengisar, a small town which is the knife capital of the world, and jade, silk, carpet, and silk. The local silk, which is Chinese silk, very different from silk here in Southeast Asia, in Thailand and Cambodia, Laos, for instance. And everything is, of course, they follow the traditional techniques in the case of manufacturing silk carpets or manufacturing silk shawls, for instance. Absolutely extraordinary. But then when you visit the jade business, it's amazing. We were going to the biggest traditionally important Silk Road jade production center, the oasis of Khotan. But we were in a small town called Yutian. And then talking to our Uyghur friends, do they produce jade here? Said, oh, of course. There's a fantastic factory like 5 minutes away. So we go there early in the morning. We talk to the manager. They give us a full tour. And when we see what they are actually doing, it's even more mind-boggling. This is a little small town in the middle of the desert. It has become one of the most important mining, producing, refining, carving, and selling high-tech jade all over the world. Incredible, Nima. Incredible. But this, I have to show you guys. This pendant, this is black and white jade, which is the highest quality of jade, which for them is normal. They work on this like, thousands of pieces every day. And they are one of the top producers of black and white high quality jade, not only in China, but they are exporting to parts of Asia. And now they're starting to look at Western markets as well. They're going to make a super splash because nobody in the West does this for this price and with this quality, And what did they do? Chinese style. They got some of their best students in their local university, tiny university in the middle of the desert. They sent to the best jade producing centers in the world, some in Germany, some in Japan. They came back and they are all working in the factory. They became shareholders of the factory. So they are directly implicated in the success of the factory, which now in China is a household. You arrive in Kashgar in the old city, invaded by zillions of tourists. They have their branch in Kashgar, in the old city. Very well located, So these are tiny examples, Nima, of if I had to have a headline for all that, how socialism with Chinese characteristics invested in a development model for a region far, far away from the center, and they succeeded in only 2 decades. This is our headline.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It is. It
It's
is.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And it has, obviously, when you are on a trip like that, obviously you don't even think about the West because the West does not exist in most of China, I would say, and obviously not in Western China. We saw Westerners themselves. We only saw a few backpackers when we went to Kashgar to get the permit to get close to the border. This is a very, very sensitive thing. You need a special permit if you are a foreigner with your passport number, photo, etc. So you can go west of Kashgar and approach the Pakistani border. There were a couple of young Italian backpackers, a Chinese-French lady, a German guy with his family, and that was it. These were the only foreigners we saw all over. And then, of course, when you arrive in Kashgar, it's different because Kashgar is a huge now tourism center. So the whole of China was in Kashgar, literally inside the old city. And then you see the odd foreigner here and there, usually a backpacker. But the West does not exist, and they don't need the West anymore, and they don't need Western tourists anymore. Why? Because there is a Chinese tourist boom. When you see the Chinese tourist boom in front of you, Nima, wow. You think that is bus loads of Chinese in the Via Veneto in Rome or in Place de la Concorde in Paris? No, this is the whole of China, motorized, going everywhere in their own country. That's something to watch. Everywhere we went, it was relatively crowded. Of course, not in the middle of the desert and not in the oasis, but everywhere in the big cities. From Xi'an to Lanzhou to Xinjiang, in Urumqi and Kashgar, it was booming with Chinese tourists, and especially last week because it was Golden Week. Golden Week in China is 8 days of holidays. Every Chinese person waits for Golden Week the whole year because they have full 8 days to get the family and disappear anywhere they want. And this is exactly what we saw in lost cities in the desert, in ruins of the Han Dynasty, in old Uyghur palaces, in several of the oases. Whole families, many of them self-driving. Just to give an example to all of you. You can self-drive a small Tank 300 Jeep, which is pretty cool. It's much cooler than a Toyota Land Cruiser, for instance. More compact, very good, super economic, reliable. Mechanics is first class. You know
We
how much
have it here in Brazil, Pepe.
you have that Tank 300 in Brazil as well,
Yeah, we
man.
have it. Yeah.
Okay, I suggest all of you buy it yesterday. It's fantastic. If I lived in China, I would have a tank probably 500 because I wanted to go on more hardcore trips. The Tank 300 is more than enough. You know how much it costs to self-drive a Tank 300 in China? $60 a day. So if you're a family of 4, dad is paying $60. He takes the family luggage in the back, and they can go anywhere. And that's exactly why we found them literally everywhere. Fascinating. And with this infrastructure, by the way, developed very, very recently, all the hotels that we stayed in the Oasis, they told us that the hotels were inaugurated less than 2 years ago. So this is a very recent boom because they were already expecting the boom of Chinese tourism inside China after COVID. Exactly what's going on now. And last week in Kashgar was impressive. You could not even walk inside the old city. And Kashgar used to be a sort of segregated place. This gets into the theme of coexistence between Han Chinese and the so-called minorities. When I visited Kashgar in the late 90s, in the early 2000s, for instance, there were two cities totally separated. There was the old city that lived like it had lived for centuries, unpaved. Some of the houses were crumbling, actually. And there was a relatively small, relatively modernizing Chinese city on the other side with a big Mao statue in the center of People's Square. But they lived separate lives. Nowadays, you get there and it's seamlessly integrated. Really, you go from one part of the city to another. You don't even notice that one part has more Han businesses and the other part is strictly Uyghur. And not only Uyghur, you find Uyghurs, you find Huis, Chinese Muslims, that you find all the way from Xinjiang across the Silk Road, all the way to Kashgar. You find descendants of Mongols. You find Uzbeks, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz nomads, everybody. And it was very, very important. This was absolutely crucial to travel all the way with Uyghurs. Our drivers were Uyghurs. Our on-the-ground producer, Jenny, Uyghur from Urumqi. The coordinator of everything that we wanted to do, Uyghur, studied at University of Urumqi. So this was great because anything about Uyghur culture, they could not only answer our questions, but take us to those places. They took us to all the even places that were not even on my list. Absolutely outstanding. The element of gastronomy, but like we could do a documentary only on Uyghur gastronomy, which is sensational. Only if you stick to the three mainstays. Lagman, which is basically noodles with vegetables and sauce. Plov, which is basically a risotto. And the famous Kashgar barbecue, which is barbecue on skewers. You can eat that forever in your life and be healthy like they are. And the naan bread, which is, I would say, a cousin of the naan bread in India, but it's much more delicious in Uyghurstan. And in some places in the desert, they make naans at the size of a football like that. And you can eat the whole thing compulsively because it's so tasty. They use their own spices, of course. So when you go to their night markets, the night bazaars, it's a gastronomic feast. Culminating, of course, with the pièce de résistance, which is the whole lamb. So when you go for a celebration in a wedding, we went to 2 weddings, one a low-key wedding and another one a Bollywood production, completely crazy. The big thing was the whole lamb, of course. And in one of the dinners that the Uyghurs offered to us, of course, the whole lamb. So, altogether, in this environment, desert, mountains, I didn't even talk about the mountains and the lakes 4,000-meter high. And that's another story, because this is not Uyghur culture anymore. This is when we cross to the Pamir lands, getting closer to the China-Pakistan border. So we have a mix of Kyrgyz nomads living in the heights, and some of them make a very good business of taking photos and renting their yaks to Chinese tourists, and the Pamiri lands, and they are all Tajik. So we stayed in Tashkurgan. Tashkurgan is the last city of China. If you're traveling in Xinjiang, after Tashkurgan, there's nothing else. There's a no man's land, and then you get to the Kunjara Pass at 4,700 more or less, and the China-Pakistan border. Where we were between 4,000 and 4,500 altitude, Tashkurgan and around. And around it, you have some of the most beautiful deep blue lakes on the planet that take your breath away. You have marvels of engineering. We took one of the roads that we took it expressly to show in the documentary how the Chinese built a road with over 600 curves in a matter of, I would say, 30 kilometers, not more than that, just to go to a village in the middle of the mountains that was inaccessible. What the Chinese do? They build a road like that to get to the village. And now it has become a mega tourist attraction all over Xinjiang and all over China as well, because it's an engineering marvel. And at the same time, the views from the road take your breath away. So, in Xinjiang, you have everything. Everything that I talked about in geopolitical, geoeconomic, developmental, energy, local culture, interaction of cultures. And you have the most important element once again, Nima, how the Chinese manage to put this all together, and it works in virtually no time. I'll give you an example, and this is very touching. In my last night in Kashgar, I was sitting with our director of photography, Stan. Stan is from Buryatia. He lives in Shanghai, speaks fluent Chinese. He lives and works in Shanghai. He was the director of photography for our documentary. And we were going through the footage, and I brought to him footage that I shot in the Sunday market in Kashgar 27 years ago. When we start to look at the footage, guess what happened? The girls at the homestay that we were staying in Kashgar, everybody was hunching over the computer. And then I was talking through the manager of the homestay. I said, please explain to them that this is their city when they were not even born. And they were like, and I was like, oh man, I think I fulfilled my mission in life. I showed a bunch of young Kashgari girls what was their city in the old Silk Road before they were even born. That was a very emotional moment. I cried like a baby afterwards. It was beautiful. It was beautiful, but it was very significant. And they could see the difference between what the city was at the time. It was basically a sort of middle age, a sort of Middle Ages style oasis in the middle of the desert. And now it's a thriving, booming city of, Kashgar now is over 2 million people. It's enormous. And with everything that you can imagine, all sorts of modernity that you can imagine, including the famous illuminated towers everywhere, very good universities, very, very important. Vocational schools, so they don't need to go anywhere else. They stay in the oasis, they stay in Urumqi, they stay in Kashgar, they study there. And Urumqi, as the capital of Xinjiang, is as important as a high-tech hub as cities in the eastern seaboard. There you go, Nima. This is, I would say, this is a mini summary of a trip that it's very hard to talk about it, and you get profoundly emotional when you are there, and you see how the Chinese themselves are so proud of what they achieved. You see families from Shanxi province, which is very, very wealthy in the east. They get to Xinjiang and they marvel at everything. They love it. It's the first time they are there. We were told that less than one Chinese in 10 has ever been to the West. They're starting to go now. And now they are discovering what socialism with Chinese characteristics, when it's invested in a project of national development, they see what happens in front of them. There's no price for that. Not to mention that this is the first time in history that this happened.
Pepe, it's not fair. You're enjoying it a lot, and your energy level is so high. We are dealing with this sort of mess and chaos in our.
You're right, Nima, and I'm glad that you posed. I'm glad that you posed this question, because this was my reaction when I left Xinjiang. I said, "Oh my God, now I have to go back to the horror stories, Zionists, Axis, NATO, all this stupidity that beyond the cosmic and all that." And it's very, very painful when you compare all that to what China is still experiences. Of course, they have problems. They have, the economy is, people in Shanghai. I traveled with 3 people from Shanghai, in fact, and they were telling me stories from Shanghai all the time. It is becoming complicated. The economy is stagnating on and off. Businesses is not as booming as it was before COVID and all that. Cost of living going up, you name it. They have their problems. But when you see, once again, to resort to Xi Dada himself, that's his latest book in English published in China, late 2023, when he talks in detail about Chinese modernization. When you see the fruits of Chinese modernization for the average Chinese family in front of you, the comparison, the contrast with the West it's beyond mind-boggling. And it's very, very difficult to go back to. At least I'm still in Southeast Asia, and here we are more or less protected from this stupidity of it all, But my past 24 hours, I'm working on China, but you have Gaza invading all the time. You have Trump authorizing tomahawks to Ukraine. It never ends. You have this stupidity of the European Union, the European Commission, over and over and over again, especially those 2 fucking bitches. I'm not going to say their names. It's terrible. I know how you feel, and I know how most of you, our audience, feels. It's extremely depressing. Yeah. So, what I was talking about China for you, it's to offer a contrast. Just to show you that the world is not like this. And a great deal of the world is definitely not like what these absolutely horrible Western political and economic elites are trying to turn the West into.
Yeah, you're totally right. I totally agree with what you've said, Pepe. And getting back to
the horrors. Now, I know that. I knew you were going to pull me back in. Nima, you know what you're doing? You're doing a scene of Godfather Part 3. When Michael Corleone says, just when you think you're out, they pull you back in. That's you.
Pepe, there is a peace plan going on in the Middle East. And
okay, sorry, but I had to laugh.
We have to laugh, exactly, because that's tragic. Unless we have to cry about it.
Yes.
Pepe, do you think that this sort of movement on the part of the Trump administration is somehow pointing out at maybe a new war between Iran and Israel in the Middle East.
You just hit the nail on the golden head, Nima. There's no question about that. First of all, because it's not a peace plan. The only objective of this, the so-called first stage in their own definition, right, is to get the hostage back. There's no other interest apart from that. On the other hand, assuming, and we cannot assume because we are dealing with a death cult, assuming they fulfill their obligations, which are now going to be surveilled by Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey. So we're not joking anymore. Now we have two Arab powers and Turkey, which will be looking exactly at what the Israelis are going to do from now on. So anything that the Israelis do, which obviously they will make this thing collapse. There's no question about that, because they never respected a single agreement in their life of a death cult masquerading as a nation state. Trump can get seriously pissed if they do that. And of course, we don't know the ramifications. But from the Trumpist cognitive dissonance impaired, I know many of you have read Cy Hirsch's report. And what Cy Hirsch was writing is basically what everybody in Washington is discussing. That Trump seems to have some serious cognitive dissonance issues now. The famous this Americanism that defines a lot of stuff. He cannot work a room anymore. He cannot hold a room anymore. This means he gets lost. This is something that Trump used to do without even blinking. He's a master of controlling a room, of working a room, of talking to everybody in the room, of being the center of attention in a room. He cannot do that anymore, and it's visible. And when that happens in the US, when people are paying attention to these millimetric details, that's very serious. So what Cy Hirsch wrote is now practically a consensus in Washington, which brings us to the dangerous aspects inherent to this new condition. Trump doesn't know exactly what he's doing. That's the bottom line. His attention span is a matter of seconds, not minutes, like it was before. Before it was 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. Now it's seconds. That's very, very dangerous. So he can, let's say he makes a decision and he believes that he has made a decision, but he forgot that he made a decision, then he takes a completely opposite decision. This explains his completely erratic behavior, especially these past months and a half. Okay, I stopped following while I was in China, but obviously you have glimpses, you have messages from your friends, and they tell you what's going on in DC. Right. So from his point of view is opening the way to get his Nobel Peace Prize, which is, once again, Narcissus, ego, cultivating his ego, buying some time for himself and for, I would say, the Trump-Netanyahu administration, which is the same thing, absolutely, and especially deviating global attention from the genocide, because now they can sell the narrative that we stopped, obviously not genocide, we stopped the horror in Gaza or whatever, whichever way they want to do. So people theoretically in their minds won't keep talking about the genocide in Gaza, which is a fait accompli, and it's already registered in history. It won't disappear, whatever you say, whatever narrative you come up with. And as you mentioned correctly in the start of your question, it's to prepare the terrain for a possible attack on Iran. There's absolutely no question about that. Everybody around Washington knows that. I would say the key centers of power across Eurasia also know that very well. Iran Tehran knows that very well. So the next few weeks are going to be absolutely crucial because depending on the movement on two fronts, we're going to see if the empire of chaos under, let's say, to be diplomatic, slightly deranged president will opt to attack in two different fronts at the same time: South America and West Asia, Venezuela and Iran. This is one possible scenario. Second possible scenario, this is all diversionist tactic, and they're going to do some sort of, kill a few more fishermen in Venezuela and declare victory, which is a imperial modus operandi, by the way. And number three, which is very, very complicated, forget about Venezuela. It will continue to be a diversionist tactic. And with this new Secretary of War, which is proving to be beyond any clownish imbecile you can even think of, and he's one of the ones that has a Trump's ear for 5 seconds, they decide side by side, after all, it's the Trump-Netanyahu administration, to attack Iran. This is the most... many of our friends, Nima, as you know, they are betting everything on an attack on Iran. I would not be so adamant. Not at all. Not at all, because there are still, even in the Pentagon, people with IQ over room temperature, and they know that this time the Iranian response is going to be massive, as you know very well, Nima, a killer. And they haven't even shown what they have, their latest weapons. And it's very interesting to compare all this blah, 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 all this hoopla, all this hysteria with the silence from Iran. Very polite, sophisticated silence from Tehran. The Iranians are just looking. They're just surveying the chessboard, which I would not recommend to these Zionist idiots messing with the Persians in a situation like that. But don't forget, we are dealing with a death cult, out of control, emboldened. And now with the so-called Gaza peace plan, we have the leader of the death cult actually saying that this was a moral, what his exact words, Nima? A moral victory for Israel, something like that. A moral national victory for Israel. No, it was not a moral victory. What they did was beyond immoral. They cannot never have a moral victory anywhere in their history. First of all, there's nothing to do with morality. And a national victory, no, it's a total defeat, because the original plan was to destroy Gaza, expel people living in Gaza, exterminate them, kill them, harass them, make them die of hunger, and then annex Gaza. Did they succeed? No. So it is a major defeat compared to what they wanted from the beginning. So I would say the only silver lining at the moment is this is a major defeat for Israel, because Gaza still resisted. And even at the end, the so-called plan by Trump Riviera guy, it's not exact, and even rewritten by Bibi. This was not the original Trump peace plan. Bibi rewrote at the last minute. The Arabs were beyond themselves, but there's nothing they could do about it. It was denounced by some. Indonesia, I think they denounced that it was rewritten. Turkey denounced that it was rewritten. But this is what we have at the moment, assuming it will be followed. There's no evidence that this will be followed so far. By the way, they're still bombing Gaza today, right? I think they're still bombing Gaza as we speak, Nima, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So there you go. You cannot trust anything coming from these people. So if we take the silver lining as, let's imagine that now there's a little bit of checks and balances coming from Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt over Israel in case they do not fulfill their commitments. But that's not more than that. For instance, there's not a single comma about how people in Gaza are going to continue to survive. No, I wouldn't say even live, continue to survive under those conditions. There's not a single comma about reconstruction. We have that bloody, stupid Portuguese head of the UN saying, the UN now is involved, we support everything, we're going to start increasing humanitarian aid and all that. This is blah, blah, blah. We only believe the UN when we actually see it. And we only believe it when you have thousands of UN protected trucks entering Gaza 24/7. We are still very far away from that. So for the moment, this is a huge, huge theatrical production. Once again, it's fiction for the moment. We are not seeing reality so far. It's wishful thinking, a lot of wishful thinking. And of course, egos involved prevailing once again. That applies to the Trump-Netanyahu continuum. And let's see if not only these three, Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, they have enough power to immediately denounce any violations by the descot of the so-called agreement, and if the Islamic lands as a whole are going to unite and start helping Palestinians in Gaza as we speak, from right now. So at the moment, Nima, we are all in the middle of this gigantic theater.
Yeah. We know that Iran offensively is capable of, fighting Israel. And one of the fragility during those 12 days of war was the defensive force of Iran. How do you find Russia and China helping Iran in their defensive power, defensive systems?
I'm sorry, Nima. Well, before I started my trip in Xinjiang, I had a fantastic off-the-record lunch in Beijing with former PLA Colonel Zhou Bo. Zhou Bo is a brilliant military analyst. He's a very, very good international affairs analyst and political scientist. He has a PhD in Cambridge, speaks fluent English, knows the West very well. But, the unwritten rules of our meeting, which was fantastic, we went to a Sichuan restaurant and we had an absolutely outstanding lunch, was I told him, Bo, I'm not going to talk about what we discussed. And so this was a matter of mutual trust. What he told me about China helping Iran was very solid, Nima. This is as much as I can say to you and to our audience. Very solid, including with what China was helping Iran. So from the Chinese point of view, we have an admission, even off the record, that yes, China has got Iran's back for obvious reasons. The strategic partnership, the fact that their deal, the $4 billion deal over 25 years, the fact that Iran is an absolutely crucial energy provider to China, is a matter of national security for China. The fact that Iran is part of BRICS and SCO, very, very important for China. So we know all that. And of course, the Chinese have to do things in a very subtle way because they don't want to antagonize the Americans head on. We also know all that. From the Russian side, it's more complicated. We actually don't know if Russia and with what Russia is already helping Iran as we speak now. We know in the past, for the past, let's say, 2.5 years, stuff that I was always discussing when I was in Moscow, stuff that I discussed with our friends like Professor Marandi, stuff that we talked about when I was in Iran 3 months ago, 4 months ago, and all that. But these past, let's say, 2 months or so, Russia must have helped Iran on a military basis in a much more substantive way. We have no evidence, Nima, from it. Nobody's leaking anything. I assume you agree with that.
But
I'm
we
sure.
know that these huge airplanes that 2 days ago we had the third one going to Iran. Huge.
Well, our evidence is this mega Antonovs coming and going to Iran. This
Yeah.
is evidence enough that something is being sent. Of course, we don't know what, and of course, this is not going to be leaked by the IRGC or by the Russian Ministry of Defense. Forget it. So we can assume that yes, at several levels, and I'm not talking only diplomatic, political support. Of course, that's more than obvious. But on a military level, both Russia and China are helping Iran in, let's say, substantive ways. So if we can come to this conclusion, obviously, those still with a IQ above room temperature in the Pentagon can also come to the same conclusion. The thing is, what they're going to do about that? Are they going to risk it? Are they going to risk a devastating Iranian response that can level Israel if they want to? This is the key question, in fact. Because from the point of view of some in the Pentagon, we're still talking about some relatively rational actors, not many. But from the point of view of the death cult, no, it's a death cult. It's a bunch of fanatics with no limits, out of control. And if they see that they are losing, they launch the Samsung option. They start a bloody nuclear war in West Asia without even blinking. And that's what makes it so immensely out of proportion dangerous. It's a death cult out of control. Whatever they do, whatever peace plan is in the making, whatever. So we continue to be hostages of this situation. And obviously, we cannot count on the President of the United States to appease these people because he is right in the middle of the Zionist axis, surrounded by Zionists.
Pepe, do you think that?
Give me your comment, Nima.
Go ahead.
Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think the IRGC in Tehran right now, and they are very rational actors, do they understand the extent that they are dealing with an out-of-control death cult that even the President of the United States cannot control?
Exactly. They know that.
They know
that. They understand fully what's going on. And you look at, it's not mentioned in the media in Iran. They're not talking about it, but you feel it. You talk with the people, you feel how they're totally prepared, Pepe. They're totally prepared, even for nuclear attacks on Iran.
Even for
God forbid that happening. That's my fear. And after all, but they're prepared for
all of us. Yes.
Yeah, and they're gonna. That's why I don't understand why would the United States let Israel go in that direction. This doesn't make sense for anybody.
It does, Nima, in terms of the grip that the Zionist axis and the ultra hardcore Zionist power players have over the United States government. We all know that the United States is not governed by a president no, it's governed by a cabal in the back, and they're all Zionists. We all know that. And there is a direct connection between this extremely volatile situation and this, I wouldn't say change, considering that he has cognitive dissonance issues, the new so-called circus ringmaster attitude towards sending Tomahawk to Ukraine, when if he has a still functioning brain, he knows exactly what this will mean. And this was the past few days, at least, it has been politely spelled out by Putin himself. Putin said, if this happens, U.S.-Russia relations will go back to zero, more or less in these terms. And Sergei Ryabkov yesterday Number two, for foreign ministry, one of the most competent diplomats on the planet, on the same level of Lavrov. Ryabkov basically said that, look, we can compare this to a collapsing building. And the building has collapsed. We are ready to start rebuilding the collapsed building anytime, but there's no interest on the other side. So this is Ryabkov saying that US-Russia relations really are back to zero, especially with this Tomahawk soap opera, which is in the interests of three very, very important players. The mafia gang in Kiev, the European establishment, because the only plan A that they have, they never had even a play A plus or A minus, is to continue the war against Russia nonstop till the last Ukrainian. And most importantly, the Zionist backers of the Trump administration. So the Zionist backers are directly involved in this ramp up of Tomahawks to Ukraine. That's how dangerous they are. They were looking at the chessboard. They were certainly looking at the chessboard in Ukraine. They were looking at the Russian advance. They were looking that Russia sooner or later will smash the front lines. It may take months, but it is inevitable. Which brings us to the looming strategic defeat of the United States. And obviously, this is something they could never admit. So what is their plan B? It's not even plan B. It's plan A again. Okay, let's continue to rearm Ukraine with even more deadly weapons. So this escalates, satisfies the Zionist axis, donors and backers of Trumpneyahu, satisfies the gang in Kiev, satisfies the European establishment, which is collapsing completely, even though we have those stupid bitches in the European Commission calling for war against Russia 24/7. They wake up in the morning and the first thing before they brush their teeth is war against Russia. That's it. Well, not to mention the popularity of governments from Le Petit Roi, the pathetic Le Petit Roi in France, to the BlackRock chancellor in Germany. So this satisfies this triad, the ramp up in Ukraine. And of course, behind all that, it's still another maneuver to keep Russia bogged down in Ukraine. This is the way they see it. So Russia cannot have an important peacemaking diplomatic role. Guess where? In West Asia, the former Middle East. It's a maneuver to isolate Russia from West Asia, Middle East, make them concentrate even more in the war now looming against more and more targets inside the Russian Federation. So everything in West Asia keeps being controlled by the Zionist axis, the Zionist backers, the Trump-Netanyahu continuum with the gang in Kiev. And of course, the stupid Europeans, they will, from now on, and they're already doing it, buying American weapons paid in euros. Great for an industrial military complex, because the euro is 20% over the dollar. And using these weapons in their forever war against Russia. So all this absolutely toxic NATO-wide conglomerate is satisfied. And that's what makes it even more repellent for all of us. And disgusting doesn't even begin to describe it, Nima. We can say that the chessboard is victim of these machinations. They want to perpetuate the forever war against Russia, and this is a consensus with all these actors. They came up with a so-called partial solution, which is not a solution, it's just a stupid theater for Gaza to deviate people's attention from the genocide. And they are concentrating on the other wars that they plan to engage, Venezuela and Iran. That's how cheap, tawdry, unqualifiably petty-minded the whole thing is. It's really disgusting. But we have to deal with this reality, right?
Pepe, do you think that Vladimir Putin was strong enough in his way of talking at the Valdai to deter the West?
Sorry, Nima.
Go ahead.
Please go ahead. Go ahead, Nima. Sorry.
Because many people are arguing that Putin needs to be more solid, more strong in his language toward the West. That's why Trump keeps continuing these sort of escalations, sending Tomahawk missiles. I'm sure if they send Tomahawk missiles, the next day or the minute after that, Taurus missile is going to be in Ukraine. And these leaders in Europe are dreaming about these things happening. How do you find the reaction of the Russian president to that?
Well, I did not follow Valdai this year on purpose because my priority was China, and I didn't miss anything. I had a lot of friends who were at Valdai, and I took a look afterwards. I didn't see anything that impressed me in what was discussed or the papers. And Putin's speech and then Q&A, it was one of the weakest in years. And I followed most of them this past few years. It was very, very weak. He was not strong enough to start with. He would have to say something like this. Okay, if they launch a Tomahawk, we launch another Sneak. That's it. This is a short version, which a lot of people in the intel agencies, I would say the absolute majority of the intel agencies, that's the consensus because they are already fed up. And they know that the provocations from the empire, from the West as a whole, even if it's fragmented, and from NATO, it's ramping up all the way. Which brings us to probably the most intelligent piece that I read after I came back from China. People sent me, and I read only when I left China, by Emmanuel Todd. Todd published a Substack in late September, which I managed to read only yesterday, and it's absolutely brilliant. Just to remind you, Nima, and our audience, the best book about the proxy war in Ukraine, including, I haven't read Russian books published these past few months, or Chinese, a few Americans maybe. But the best analysis, concise and overarching, because it's not only geopolitical and geoeconomic, it's demographic. It's very, very important. It's Emmanuel Todd's La Défaite de l'Occident, The Defeat of the West, which was published in France in early 2024, last year. I was the first one to review the book in English. So all of you, if you go to Sputnik, the website, and you go through my page, you're going to find my review, which was published right after the book was published. I happened to be in Paris at the time. The day the book came out, I bought the book at Gallimard. And two or 3 days later, I came out with the first review in English. And people in Paris told me that the Gallimard people were like, wow, we have a review in English even before the reviews in French, because the book was that important. And Todd was the first analyst, very interesting, French, European, but an European with an open mind, and an European educated in the Fernand Braudel longue durée, the long cycles of history.
Pepe, sorry for interrupting you. There is another book by Jacques Beau that Colonel Jacques Beau.
I have to read Jacques Beau's book. Thank you for reminding me.
2024, The Russian Art of War is so much important for those people who want to understand.
Thank you for reminding me and our audience as well. Excellent. But Todd goes way beyond international relations, political science analysis, Nima. That's why his book is so important, because there's a cultural analysis of the decline of the West. There's a demographic, religious, cultural, and anthropological analysis of the defeat of the West. That's why it's so important. And he wrote this wonderful little essay on Substack. And I selected one particular paragraph where he is very, very diplomatic, but he goes to the jugular, explaining why we are reaching this stage that we were discussing only 5 minutes ago, our impotence vis-a-vis this toxic alliance of Zionist donors and backers of Trump Yahoo, of how they work together, their connection with the gang in Kiev, this absolutely disgusting European political elites. You know, it's of course it's the same vortex, right? So very elegantly, Todd writes, I can't sketch here a model of the dislocation of the West. This is a very sophisticated way of saying the absolute collapse of the West. Now, he prefers to talk about dislocation. And he refers to the inconsistencies of the policies of Donald Trump, and then comes the adjective that kills, the defeated American president. What is he saying here? He's saying what every American analyst simply cannot admit on the record, especially inside the United States. Trump is the defeated president, and Trump inherited a war that was already lost, and now this is his war. So he is the defeated president, in charge at the moment, theoretically in charge. And then Todd goes, one step beyond, talking about the inconsistencies of Trump. The most important aspect is not that he's unstable and undoubtedly perverse. I love the quirky sense of humor here. Unstable and undoubtedly perverse personality. There's no question. It's a pretty good 4-letter word definition of Trump. But from an insoluble dilemma for the United States. And that's the crux of Todd's argument. On the one hand, Todd writing, on the one hand, there are leaders both in the Pentagon and the White House. Well, we cannot say that they have a leader in the Pentagon now, because the new Secretary of War is just a clown. Know that the war is lost. No question about that. And that Ukraine will have to be abandoned. In fact, Trump is abandoning Ukraine the Trump way. Trump, in fact, delivered Ukraine to Europe. The Trump plan is, okay, you buy all our weapons, pay in euros, non-stop, and this is your war. And then you sell or give or whatever to Ukraine, but this is your war against Russia. I have nothing to do with this anymore. This is the Trump plan. Common sense, writes Todd, would lead them to get out of the war, but they are not getting out of the war. As we're just discussing 10, 15 minutes ago, the Zionist axis doesn't want to get out of the war because they want Russia bogged down in a war in Ukraine, with Ukraine supported by the whole of Europe.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the same common sense, which, by the way, doesn't exist, that's Todd. Todd writes the same common sense. And my comment is there is no common sense in the end. They realize the most important thing, and this is what the elites that control the United States, they have already realized. The withdrawal from Ukraine will have dramatic consequences for the empire, much more dramatic consequences for the empire than those from Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And that's the key, Nima. Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, compared to the defeat of the collective West, of the empire and NATO as a whole in Ukraine, they were a child's game compared to the defeat in Ukraine. And this is I would say, the Emmanuel Todd headline for our conversation. This is indeed the first American strategic defeat on a global scale. Man, you cannot get more hardcore than that, Nima. There's only one guy who had the guts. Okay, he can write that because he's in Europe. And obviously, everybody in Europe is going to say that he's paid by Putin, he's a Kremlin stooge, he has no credibility, the usual crap. Look, when I follow the French media, I know how stupid they can be. They're one of the most stupid on the planet. But this formulation by Todd is absolutely brilliant. This is the headline of the 21st century. We are dealing with the first American strategic defeat on a global scale, and guess who's the guy who has to manage it? And this is what Todd wrote almost 2 years ago, Nima: Donald Trump.
Oh.
I rest my case. In fact, I rest Todd's case, which for me is the definitive case explaining why we are here now. So obviously there can be no solution in sight. The Tomahawk drama is the latest drama. There will be other ones,
Yeah.
So the only way to stop this thing would be Vladimir Putin, I wouldn't say stating, but acting. If there is a Tomahawk attack on Russia, Oreshnik on Berlin or Paris, not the cities themselves, NATO bases, or the bloody Ramstein base in Germany. And even then, they won't get the message, Nima. Even then, they won't get the message because this compulsive logic of war is inescapable to the way the system works as a whole. And the system, when we say system, is not in a Wallerstein sophisticated way, world system. It's that petty little Zionist-driven system that unites United States, Israel, and political elites in Europe, which is less than 12% of humanity, which keeps the other, the global majority hostage in many ways. How do you get rid of these people? Wow, don't ask me. I have an answer, but I cannot say it in public. And we all have an answer for how this thing could possibly end. And okay, so I rest the case for all of us at this moment, and I want you all to reflect on this formulation. What are the consequences of the first American strategic defeat on a global scale? Are all of us, the rest of the planet, or the majority of the planet, are we going to have to pay for their strategic defeat? Or are they going to continue to try to destroy bits and pieces of the planet nonstop, trying to at least postpone their inevitable demise? That's where we are.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Pepe. Muito obrigado.
Come on, muito obrigado a você. Thank you. Well, we started talking about auspicious things in China, and we ended with what T.S. Eliot appropriately defined as the horror. But unfortunately, we all live in the middle of the horror. So I leave you, Lima, and all of you with the best auspicious vows from this side of the world, where people don't think about horrors. People are thinking about developing and leading a better life.
Yeah. I hope we can learn from them. I hope. Pepe, obrigado, viu?
Thank you, my dear. Muito obrigado. Foi um grande prazer. E para mim foi legal porque eu consegui falar muita coisa que estava por aqui. Cheers. Bye bye.
Cheers. Até mais.
Bye bye. Cheers. Bye bye.